Welcome to the Social Priority Podcast here on Star Panda TV. I'm Star Panda, and today we have a discussion about detransition. But first, let me introduce the perfect person to ask about this topic as a detransition person herself, Shabnak Adyr. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, good. So first things first, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Anything interesting happening this week, or?
Not particularly. The Air and Water show is happening here in Chicago, so I get to deal with the sounds of airplanes over my apartment.
Oh, good.
Yeah, always fun.
I think I used to live near an airport, and the constant sounds of airplanes like flying overhead was very obnoxious.
Yeah, it's every year. It is just a pain to get through. And they practice for like a few days before the actual show. So it's like the whole week I get to deal with it.
So if you feel comfortable, what do you do for a living?
Well, right now I'm actually pregnant. So I have I have HG, hyperemesis gravidarum, which is like very severe morning sickness. So I wasn't able to work through that. And then once the baby arrives, I'm gonna take at least a couple of years to help raise him. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Yeah. So did you join any trans communities online or stick around trans people in your life?
As far as trans communities online, not really. I have never really been in like any trans groups. I would sometimes go on like Reddit forums, but very sparingly. And occasionally went to a couple of meetings locally, but never really went regularly. But a lot of the people I know in my real life are trans, and yes, we still talk, we still hang out and everything, so it hasn't been a problem.
So there hasn't been like any tension between you or anything?
No, I mean, I tend not to talk about detransition or anything related to it like in real life. I keep most of that online. But I mean, I have a bunch of trans friends and acquaintances who follow me on Twitter and know all of the stuff I say, and you know, it's never been a problem for any of them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if there is tension, I am just oblivious to it.
I can feel that. I'm very oblivious to lots of things that even my partner is trying to hint at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how old were you when you first started your transition, and what was your thought process going into it?
So I was first diagnosed with gender dysphoria when I was 14. But my parents were very, very religious, and they basically just pretended like it didn't happen and like didn't let me, you know, explore anything. So I didn't actually end up transitioning until I was about I think I had just turned 20 is when I came out and I started socially transitioning. And I started medically, I got on HRT a few months after that. And then I got top surgery about a year later.
What was the first sign that you didn't feel transition was right for you? And how did this come to a head?
So the way it started was actually I was a few years post top surgery at this point, actually maybe 2 years. I was 23 and I had been on HRT for a while and I was having a lot of trouble passing still. And that was a pretty big deal for me. Not because like I thought I needed to pass to be trans or anything like that, but you know, I didn't want to deal with people reading me as female, and I didn't want to be stigmatized for being visibly trans. And I had started to consider some other means of medical transition, like facial masculinization surgery. But I didn't really personally want them. Like, I was fine with the way that I looked, but I wanted these surgeries so that other people read me the way I wanted to be read.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like at some point my transition had become less about me being happy and a lot more about how other people saw me. And I felt like in order to get away from that, I had to kind of drop the expectations that I had as far as how people read me and how I present to other people and try to find just like internal validation.
Right.
And once I did that, I kind of started to feel like I didn't have any sort of predilections towards gender at all. And that made me start to feel as though maybe my whole transition might have been kind of seeking this social validation that I had come to find just towards the end of it. And then at that point, I decided to go off HRT to see if, I really needed to be on it. And I was fine without it. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I don't really care about being seen as a man anymore. So I think I'm just going to kind of let things be as they are, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Was there any part of your transition that you regretted at all?
Not really. There was a time when I first started realizing like I'm basically detransitioning is what I'm doing. Where I was like freaking out because I was like, oh my God, I've ruined my body with these hormones and this surgery, and nobody's ever going to view me like as a woman again. People are always going to view me as like some strange, weird thing. But the more I thought about that, the more it felt like I was kind of framing my experience around the only detransition narrative that I knew. Because the idea that people have about detransition is that it's like the worst thing that could possibly happen. People sometimes don't even want to transition at all because they're so scared of detransitioning. And
Right. Yeah.
I'd always heard so much about like, you're going to regret it, you're going to ruin yourself, But personally, I never really felt like I disliked anything about my transition. I didn't feel like I disliked anything about what it had done to my body. And it felt like I was, again, kind of basing those feelings off of what other people saw. It was like people thought that masculine women or women who'd had mastectomies were less women or that they were bad somehow. And I was kind of internalizing that feeling as well.
Mm-hmm.
So once I had let go of that feeling, I was able to realize, like I'm fine with the way my body looks. I'm fine with the effects I got from HRT. It really doesn't bother me.
Do you currently, I guess, identify with being a woman, or is it some other like category that you feel like you fall under?
So sort of, I do as a woman, kind of. For me, like, I consider myself a woman in part because, like, that's how people see me. That's mostly how people treat me. how they interact with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of accept that that's how people are going to view me. And because I'm, pregnant right now and I'm going to be having a child and I'm going through the medical system in this very like feminized way, or I guess like female centric way, that's kind of just what I've come to accept. But as far as like, am I feeling like very strongly about being seen as a woman or anything? Not really. Like if people read me as male, that's fine with me. I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even really correct people at this point. It's just kind of whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I know how that feels. Like, even in my transition, I very much like just, I guess, in my life, if I'm not like talking to people or a certain person regularly, I won't really correct them. There was this one time where I was working and someone had misgendered me, and I didn't say anything, but like one of the other people that I worked with had mentioned it to me and asked me, "Hey, you're you go by female pronouns, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they mentioned, "Hey, they misgendered you." And I'm just like, I'm never gonna see them again.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you just gotta move on. It's not worth it.
Yeah, it feels like more of a bother to say something sometimes. So,
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
but yeah, I have definitely felt that. Um, so w- I do on that subject of gender, since you have sort of been on both sides of the gender coin. Um, w- let's see. What would womanhood mean to you?
Oh, that's that's a hard question. I don't really know. Sometimes I can relate to people who talk about, finding personal happiness in their sense of gender, regardless of what that might be. But for me, I feel like it's always been kind of negative. Like the reason I first transitioned and wanted to be seen as a man was because I had gender dysphoria. Like that was it.
Mhm.
And the reason I came to detransition was because I needed to, for my own health, just kind of accept that I couldn't control how people saw me. So for me, there's always been kind of these negative feelings around gender, and womanhood is kind of something that is, I don't want to say imposed upon me, but kind of. um, so I don't know. I don't know how I would classify womanhood personally outside of just the way that I have moved through society and the way that society looks at me and treats me, um, based on being read as female or as a woman.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so I feel like you already answered this question, but do you feel comfortable in your own body currently?
Yeah, actually, I feel more comfortable than I've ever felt in my body,
That's
um,
great.
which is kind of ironic because I am suffering from horrible pregnancy symptoms. But um, yeah, the process of detransitioning for me, I think, made me just kind of accept my body for how it was and to not try and change everything, not micromanaging everything. Um, and accepting that there are things that my body that, I might not personally love, but, I'm healthy, I'm well, my body helps me do what I need to do, and that's ultimately what matters to me.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great message. Um,
I yeah.
what was that?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I've always liked, body positivity messages, but sometimes it felt like it was unrealistic for me to love absolutely everything about myself. So I
Mhm.
feel like just trying to accept the way that it looks and the way that it functions and learning and finding ways to embrace my body without, absolutely thinking it's perfect has been more helpful for me.
Yeah. I will say that after a few years of presenting as a woman, um, I most of my body image has come from like what's around me and like what
Mm.
society is telling me I should look like. And that's kind of what I'm struggling with right now. Like,
Mhm.
I don't even want this kind of stress, but like it just happens anyways because like you're constantly bombarded by these things.
Right.
And I'm really happy that you're able to like I guess ignore it to a certain extent and like be happy with your own body. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real struggle for all women, like just trying to block out all of the constant negative messages
Mhm.
of how a woman is supposed to look or supposed to feel about herself. And yeah, getting to that point where you can just ignore everything is really hard, but very worth it.
I think probably the goal in anyone's I guess gender journey, whether you're cis or trans, is probably just content in yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, um, moving on from the more personal stuff, I guess, but I guess we'll still be talking personally every now
Yeah.
and then. But I want to talk about, I guess, more of the society's dealings with detransitioners and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So there isn't really a lot of research on detransition people like you out there. Even
Mhm.
less research than trans people have. But even so, TERFs and gender critical people like to use people like you as an example of why people shouldn't be allowed to transition at all. Before anything else, I do want to ask, how do you see all of this?
Um, the the usage of detransitioners as like a cudgel against
Yeah,
transition.
like that, and like I guess the arguments that they use with detransitioners.
Oh man. There's a lot.
Yeah, you can take your
I
time.
don't know where. Yeah, I don't even really know where. Um, yeah, I feel like that whole movement has very much affected the way that detrans communities operate and the way that they are built. Um, I remember when I was first starting to detransition, I tried looking for groups that could provide some sort of insight or support, but a lot of them, when I left them, I ended up feeling worse than I did before.
Hmm.
um, and it often feels like whether it's intentional or not, a lot of the sort of gender critical messaging makes people feel like they're ruined or mutilated by virtue of having transitioned. And I feel like that's an extremely harmful message to be getting, especially when you're in, an already really vulnerable place in regards to, your place in society, your gender identity, your body. To be told, like you've basically just ruined your body and your life.
Right.
And that, when I see gender critical people saying, invoking detransition and detransitioners as these ruined people, I always want to say something, but like I feel like they don't really care about our well-being. I feel like they kind of want us to feel as badly as possible because that makes for better propaganda, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, or?
I guess that's enough for now, but I'm
How
sure
about
we'll talk
this?
more about it.
How about this? What is your experience on, I guess, online with Twitter and all that? Like, I guess being outwardly detransitioned.
I've gotten a wide variety of interactions from people. I've gotten people telling me, like, actually, you should view yourself as mutilated.
Oh
I've
God.
gotten people who basically just tell me, like, you're lying about your experience. You're not a real detransitioner. If you would, then you would agree with me. And it's not all just like gender critical people. Sometimes I'll get other people as well who are like, if you're detransitioned, then the best thing you can do is just shut up about it. But
Yeah, I think that kind of language is fucked because, like, there's no reason to exclude people from the conversation when they have their own experiences in
Mhm.
the transgender community, you know?
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it comes from all directions, and I understand why the voices of detransitioners tend to be very polarized, and I understand why a lot of people choose not to be public about it in the first place, because it's just a horrible atmosphere to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So what types of arguments do you tend to see from I guess the TERFs and the gender critical people? And which of them are most infuriating to you?
I mean, the mutilated bodies thing is probably the thing that gets to me most.
Hmm.
But also, I guess just this idea that I, you know, detransitioners are often framed in this way that we are all confused and that we didn't know what we were doing when we were transitioning, and that in order to save future people from detransitioning, then we need to, curtail transition care, or we need to set up more gatekeeping or something like that. And I just don't feel like I was ever confused during my transition. Um, if there was any time where I was ignorant or clueless, it was usually because my doctors were also ignorant and clueless. Um, I was very, very determined to transition.
Hmm.
And I feel like when we are reduced to just being like confused or delusional, it really downplays the reasons why people transition in the first place. And it feels like people don't really want to listen to the pain that people feel from dysphoria. They don't want to actually help us. They just want to view us as like these very un I like they view us as delusional basically, and they don't want to view us as anything beyond that. And that's
Hmm.
harmful not only to detrans people but also to trans people as well, of course.
Right.
Um, but my thing has always been that I don't want to curtail transition care, or I certainly don't want to end it. All that I want is for people to have more information, because I don't think that more information can ever be a bad thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I just think that we should have more options available to us, more resources, more support groups. so that we can feel like we're really informed on what decisions we can make and we feel empowered to make them.
Yeah, I think I agree with that very wholeheartedly. We definitely have those issues. I guess I kind of have a theory that like TERFs and gender critical people tend to be like I guess hiding their power level on how misogynist they are, because the way that they treat us, uh both trans people and detrans people, is very infantilizing.
Yes.
Um like we are treated like we don't know what's good for us, and that like we um like if we just accepted how we were born or whatever, that we would probably be happier or whatever. And that's
Mhm.
it's just not the case. Like we have agency in our own lives, and we can absolutely make our own decisions and our own mistakes if it comes to it. Like I wouldn't want my agency taken away just because someone else thinks it might be a mistake, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I am so flabbergasted when I see people saying that like 25-year-olds can't make the decision to transition. It's like, oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
it's not even just kids at this point. They're like full on adults.
Yeah, literally their brains have finished
Yeah.
developing at
Yeah, it's
25.
right. Um, but yeah, I don't think any therapist or any doctor can tell you like 100% for sure, like, yeah, transitioning is right for you. I think that's very much like a decision that people need to make for themselves.
Yeah, it's very much a personal decision that
Hmm.
you have to make. Like no one can make this decision for you. Not even TERFs or gender critical people can make that
Yeah,
decision for you. Um,
for sure.
and like I think that's a lot of the issues that we have with, I guess, women's rights, because like there's so much agency being taken away, especially in the United States right now,
Hmm.
with like abortion and all that. I don't know if you are supportive of abortion, but
Yes,
um,
I am.
you are. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Um, like they're taking away so much agency for like all sorts of women, um, cis or trans or whatever. And it's worrying that they see us as so infantilized that we can't make our own choices. And I think we are taking a step back from all the progress we made, and it's it can feel a little bit doomer sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, hopefully we can turn this around pretty quickly.
Yeah,
Um,
hopefully. It's really hard to stay positive, sure. Things are grim here.
yeah, but
uh,
I think there's a lot of people um, fighting for us, and uh, I think there's a lot of people who like agree that people should have their agency, whether they're a woman or whether they're black or brown or anything. Like everyone should be able to have the opportunity and the right to, I guess, make their own decisions for their lives. And
mhm.
I think we're socially on the right path. There's just a lot of people in power who want to make that different, you know?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Uh, so, let's see. Here is a little bit of a different question. Do you think trans advocates and allies are a little too quick to dismiss detrans experiences in response to these arguments?
Yes. um, the problem is that I feel like with with detrans arguments, when people are arguing about detransition, it's often framed around like, what does this mean for transition care?
Mm-hmm.
On both sides, this is how it's framed. And that's why often people argue about, like, what's the rate of detransition? How many people regret it? How many people retransition? Because detransition is kind of seen as, like, this inherent failure. And I feel like trans people and their allies kind of need to move away from that framing. Because I don't view like my transition as having failed. I feel like we should be stressing that detrans people need to have support and resources rather than, using us as a way to just restrict the rights of trans people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the distinction is like viewing us solely as like topics within like trans advocacy and like viewing us as people with just like a unique set of needs and yeah, like mental health needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, the I guess the care that a person who is detransitioning would be a bit different than a trans person who is beginning their transition. Um, what? Here's a question I want to know. What? I guess what kind of care did you have in your detransition, and what kind of resources would you like to have?
Well, I didn't have any resources.
Right.
Um, I I didn't even let my doctor know that I was going off T. I just completely dropped off the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, just because there's a lot of stigma around it, I didn't want to deal with the possibility that they might, try to talk me out of it. And I didn't really know what they could do for me other than just tell me, okay, wean it off and we'll take your labs afterwards. um, but I do wish that we had, first of all, better treatment from doctors when we do decide to detransition, and also more information about what we can expect long term. For me specifically, there was a lot of ambiguity as to what testosterone might have done for fertility.
Mm.
And because shortly after I detransitioned, I got like a hormone panel done, and it said that I was probably going to have trouble getting pregnant. It didn't end up being the case, but
Yeah.
um, it's just like for a while that was very unnerving to not know, what to expect from HRT and what to expect going off of it. And I know it can be really frustrating for people who have had like hysterectomies or gonadectomies, because there's a lot of unknown health effects that happen from that, especially after you've been on HRT for a while as well.
Right.
And also just generally, I feel like more mental health resources. I would love to join like a DTrans group, but I have never found like one that meets in person. Um,
Yeah, and I
Even if
imagine
I
that
did.
a lot of those DTrans groups are kind of taken over by gender critical people who
Yeah,
are.
yeah, that's what I was gonna
Yeah.
say. um, like I've known that some of those things have existed before, but they were very much like in that direction of things. So even if I did know of DTrans groups that existed in my area, I don't know if it would even be helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Um,
unfortunate.
yeah.
Like I think we absolutely do need to have a better support system um for detrans people and honestly for trans people too, cuz like
Yeah.
these resources on like in either situation is just abysmal.
Yeah.
I guess. Um and like I guess there's just so many dynamics that you could have in these groups that you don't really know if you have the right kind of support that you need, you know.
Mhm.
Um but yeah, I definitely agree that we need more resources for those kinds of things. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's it's bad when you're detransitioned, but yeah, it's also bad when you're a trans person as well. Like, I know a lot of trans people will have to go to like online forums to ask about like side effects from HRT because their doctors just have absolutely no idea.
yeah.
um,
I think that's
and
how I started out actually.
that, yeah, it's super common, and it's just really unfortunate that there isn't more information available to people.
Yeah. So, based on what you said earlier, um you, I guess you would probably say that most of your detransition was based on, would it be internal or external factors to you?
Um, well, I would say at first it was external factors because it was, how people were perceiving me, but then through that I kind of had this internal change. So it was kind of like one led to the other.
Right. Yeah. Um do you think you'd ever change your mind in the future?
I've thought about that. I don't think so. Um, like I've thought about if there was an absolute guarantee, like people will see you as male. I don't know if I would do that.
Mhm.
I feel like at this headspace that I'm in now, I feel like it just doesn't really matter to me anymore.
yeah.
Um, I'm just kind of like how people see me is how they're gonna see me. Like it doesn't really matter that much. Um, yeah, I kind of like this weird woman niche that I'm filling.
the little bit of in between that you have.
Yeah.
Um what would you say, or I guess what would you like to say to trans people who are either on the edge of transition or detransition?
Oh man, I feel like I'm maybe like the worst person to ask for advice because my whole like journey has been the equivalent of like stumbling around in the dark for several hours until I accidentally find a light switch.
I feel like we're
Um,
all like that.
yeah, I guess that's true. Um, it might sound a little bit cliche, but I would say to be kind to yourself and to really validate the way that you feel and the self knowledge that you have, not only at this current moment, but also in the past. Because, you know, I already talked about it a little bit, but when I was first detransitioning and I felt like looking back, I was so confused and I couldn't make sense of why I had done this in the first place. Um, but I really needed to look back at myself with kindness and to understand that there was a reason why I made the decisions that I did, and that I wasn't delusional, and that I was making decisions that I felt were best for me at the time. So I think that's really important to validate.
yeah. Yeah, that's even if it is cliche, I think that's worth repeating, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I sometimes forget to be kind to myself, so like it's good to hear that, and I think it'd be good for people to hear that as well, who are
Mhm.
either listening or like you know, just hearing it like somewhere out there in the void. um and is there anything else that you want people to know about either your experience detransitioning or even your experience in general?
Man, I would say that I think people should be more open to experiences that are different from their own, and to recognize that, you know, I detransitioned. I decided that I didn't want to continue my transition, but, that doesn't mean that other people aren't valid for wanting to transition. Like, we can have different trajectories, we can have different places where we are or want to be, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, right on. uh well, I really appreciate you coming on and answering all my super personal questions.
Yeah, of
um
course.
is there anything that you'd like to shout out, like even if it's like something unrelated to you?
Um, I I don't know. I guess I'll shout out my Twitter.
Go ahead.
I'm Shabnak Adyr on Twitter, at Shabnaka. So if you want to come follow me, I talk about mostly detransitioning, but also gender and trans issues as well.